Prophet mentions 7 people that are shaded under the throne of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, 7 categories of people. But it's the throne of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that is shading you. Okay? And the Prophet goes through and he mentions a just ruler, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He mentions young people that grow up in the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'll paraphrase for the sake of time. He mentions someone whose heart is attached to the masjid. He mentions, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, 2 people who love each other only for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He mentions someone who is called by a woman of great beauty and status. And he said, no, I fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So someone who resists temptation. He mentions someone, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who gives charity in secret. And he mentions someone who sheds tears in secret. So these are the 7 categories. Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah says, the underlying theme here is mukhalafatul hawa. That they all resisted something for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The just ruler resisted power. The young person that was called to adultery and fornication resisted lust. Someone resisted ego. Someone resisted greed, right? All of these, forms of resisting temptation for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, holding yourself for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And now you find yourself, after you've resisted recognition, resisted ego, resisted lust, resisted power, now you're finding that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings you under His throne on the Day of Judgment. And imagine the view, looking out and seeing everybody else sweating, drowning in their sweat, and you under the throne of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's something I want you to think about very practically here. Number 1, you don't need to be special to fall into any of these categories. You just need to be sincere. None of these categories, or at least there is no person who can make the claim that they can't fall into any of these categories, right? Despite whatever wealth you may or may not have, position you may or may not have, right? Who can claim that they don't belong to any of these categories, or they can't belong to any of these categories? So that's the first thing I want you to think about here. The second thing is, now the Prophet ﷺ is giving you practical ways to construct your shelter on the Day of Judgment. We're not talking about building houses in Jannah yet. We're talking about constructing your shelter on the Day of Judgment. This is shade for survival, not serenity. Serenity will come in paradise bidhnillahi ta'ala under the coolness of those trees and under the coolness of that shade. This is survival. How do you build your shelter? Because this is a land that you will stand on for some time until you go on to your permanent destination. And you want to be prepared and bring it with you.